Hi, my name is Tom, and I'm a friend of Drawers, and I sure wish I could be in Zerdat to deliver this personally, but I understand you're doing my favorite town, which is Chicago, and I'll just ramble on with some overviews here. I was in Chicago from 1979 to 1995. It was my first real job. It was my first real company. I met my wife, and I met that wonderful guy, Dror Kessler. I ate the best food there, heard the best music, gained my most weight, and it was a very energetic, wonderful city. In fact, I've really given some thought to this, and Chicago is sort of a microcosm. No, not a microcosm, a macrocosm. It's really bigger than life. It's what America fantasizes it is, and it's what America is, both good and bad, and there is plenty of bad. I'm going to take you through some Chicago history, primarily by looking at its writers, and dabble in other little pieces of trivia. And I think the most representative of early Chicago is a very well-known poem. Every elementary school kid has to read it, by Carl Sandberg. It was written in the late 1880s, and it, of course, is titled Chicago. And at the time, Chicago was just growing like crazy. It really was a center as it is now, a center of industry, commerce, money, and such. It's titled Chicago, and it goes as follows. Hog butcher for the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads and the nation's freight handler, stormy, husky, brawling, city of big shoulders. They tell me you are wicked, and I believe them, for I have seen your painted women under the gas lamps luring the farm boys. And they tell me you are crooked, and I answer, yes, it is true. I have seen the gunmen kill and go free to kill again. And they tell me you are brutal, and my reply is, on the faces of women and children, I have seen the marks of want and hunger. And having answered so, I turn once more to those who sneer at this my city, and I give them back the sneer, and I say to them, come and show me another city with lifted head, singing so proud to be alive and coarse and strong and cunning, flinging magnetic curses amid the toil of piling job on job. Here is a tall, bold slugger set vividly against the little, soft cities, bragging and laughing that under his wrist is the pulse, and under his ribs the heart of the people, laughing the stormy, husky, brawling laughter of youth, half-naked, sweating, proud to be the hog butcher, proud to be the tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and freight handler to the nation. And many of these phrases that you heard in this poem get pulled through Chicago's entire history, and they'll come back up again in another piece that I'll read. But it really was that industrious, and it played an amazing role in the development of labor. The famous Haymarket Riot of the 1880s, where back then there was approximately a socialist party of 7 million people, and during a protest, someone threw a bomb and ended up with one of the most rigged trials, murder trials in American history against 5 alleged bombers. Basically, they were striking for an 8-hour workday. And today the Haymarket Riot is memorialized for those who still follow socialism and communism as the May Day, May Day workers' rights. Labor was an amazing convoluted place in Chicago. One of its radical writers at the University of Chicago, Thorsten Veblen, wrote a book called Economic Theory of the Leisure Class. And in that book, he coined the phrase, which is often used today, conspicuous consumption. From that poem, the New York press took umbrage and basically nicknamed Chicago the Windy City, not because of the wind, but of course the hot air and bravado that was coming from Chicago. In the 50s, they renewed it with the term the Second City, which of course we now know as entertainment. One of the big issues in Chicago, as a macrocosm for America, was race. They call Chicago the city of neighborhoods. There's, some say, over 120 different neighborhoods, and there are plenty of people in each of those neighborhoods that they'd like to keep it that way, them and nobody else. Many scholars, at least through the 70s and 80s, viewed Chicago as the most segregated and racist city in America. What's the guy's name? Very famous writer, wrote Native Son. Richard Wright wrote some of his black literature there. A woman I actually read when I was very young and knew nothing of Chicago, a very famous black writer, Gwendolyn Brooks, wrote a poem which I'd like to read to you. It's very short, and it actually impressed me when I was 10. It was one of the first poems that I memorized. It's called The Pool Players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We fin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. She was the first black ever awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1950. She went on to basically start poetry slams in the 1980s. I met her then. Truly an amazing woman and quite a spokesman. So race was just an ongoing problem in Chicago, and it frankly still is. There was massive, hundreds of thousands of blacks immigrated from the South prior to World War I to work in the industries, and then a second wave prior to World War II. And it's certainly, any integration was not facilitated by Mayor Daley, the famous Richard Daley, who controlled Chicago for many, many years, from basically the 40s, late 40s to the 70s. He was noted for just incredible blunders with the English language, or else on purpose sorts of things. There was a huge amount of rioting in Chicago in '68, both racial and the Democratic National Convention, the Vietnam War, the draft. Basically, the Chicago police murdered several Black Panthers that turned into a farce trial as well. And as a result, during a press conference, during discussion of these crimes and protests, Daley said the police were not there to create disorder, they were there to preserve disorder. Another famous writer, Nelson Algren, man with a golden arm, he also wrote Chicago City on the Make. He was basically a pre-beat writer, an excellent writer. He was Simone Bouvier's lover. She traveled to Chicago and basically documented him in her novel, The Mandarins. But he wrote a blurb that basically responds to Daley and Sandberg that I thought was just excellent. And it's short. I'd like to read that to you. He said, I too wish to defend my city from people who keep saying it's crooked. In what other city can you be so sure a judge will keep his word for $500? What's so crooked about that? I'm tired of hearing the detractors of my city say it is brutal. In what other city, head held high, sweating, laughing, all of that, can you get a homicide reduced to manslaughter, and a manslaughter to a felony, and a felony to a misdemeanor? What do you want, for God's sake? Your gun back? We have to keep Chicago strong and America mighty, I heard His Honor proclaim before sentencing the woman with a record for addiction. A year and a day, take her away. Blinking and out of the window of an Ogden Avenue trolley at sunlight she hadn't seen for almost a year. I guess it was lucky I'd done that time, the girl philosophized. Chicago still looks pretty strong and America still looks pretty mighty. Still, no one seems to be laughing. Daley so hated this writer that basically his books were banned from the Chicago public schools and the Chicago libraries for years and years. Other famous writers of Chicago, one you may have heard of, is Saul Bellow. He was probably the most well-respected, most recognized writer of the late 20th century, or mid to late 20th century. He always fought the label of being a Jewish writer, but basically all of his novels, his most famous one, Herzog, basically dealt with, the internal conflicts, alienation of Jewish life of a man who thinks and is a moralistic life. And his comment on Chicago, it's great books. If you have not read Saul Bellow, it really captures the essence of post-World War II Americana and Americana Judaism. His comment on Chicago in an interview once was that it was vulgar but vital. And I think that's really telling, that he didn't say or and, that it was vulgar but vital, and it was necessary, I think, to just the development of the country. Let's see, what else have we got? We talked about race, we talked about the poem. Oh, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention music. With all that great black migration came an incredible amount of blues and jazz, of course. My favorite is Coco Taylor. Two of her best songs, I think, is Hey Bartender and Sweet Home Chicago, which I used to mumble under my breath each time I'd walk down the jetway coming back to Chicago. Another very, not quite as well known, of course, folk singer that Dror may be familiar with, and he may have already queued these two songs up, and I'd like to finish because they really do summarize Chicago. Don't worry, I won't sing them. One is Lincoln Park Pirates, about Daley's corrupt administration putting up no parking signs and then towing away cars, and of course holding them for ransom. I understand. I read an article, the same sort of thing happens in Tel Aviv. And he also wrote the Dying Cub Fans' Last Request. I don't really follow sports, so I can't comment on the amount of prominence sports played in Chicago, but it's major. And if you listen to that song, you'll have an essence of the frustration of a Chicago Cubs fan. So all in all, it's a great city. It basically has touched everybody at some point. I hope this gave you a little insight. I wish I could be there to answer any questions or drink or sing along with the Steve Goodman songs. Take it easy, guys. Bye.